Um, in this part 4, I would like to mention about the variety of sectors in which the Indian behavioral scientists have made contributions in the last, again, 50 and odd years. I think great contributions were made in 60s by behavioral scientists. I would like to begin by the corporate sector. In the corporate sector, the behavioral science contributions took the form of initiating change. One, of course, is through training, and particularly focusing on training in process competencies, which largely was impacted or borrowed from the laboratory education of NTL. Uh, I think in 60s, a large number of behavioral scientists worked with corporations and introduced a distinct T group training. For example, State Bank of India is one of those who conducted uh, T groups, which were, of course, in India called as L groups, learning groups, and so on for dogs years. I think Dr. Uday Parikh, Somnath Chattopadhyay, Mrityunjay Atreya, Dharani Sinha, a whole lot of others have worked with this. So, in the corporate sector, a good part of the change took the form of initiating T group training and helping people to discover human process using groups as a mechanism, largely following the T group methodology. This is one kind of a school of thought that happened. Many corporations, I think, incorporated this particular mode of training. The second thing, it took the form of an organization development experience. Organizations like Coal India or Bharat Coking, BCCL, impacted by the IIM Calcutta. IIM Calcutta had some excellent behavioral scientists, both from abroad. I think Warren Bennis used to visit, Doug McGregor used to visit. What I'm told, Ken Benny, Howard Baumgartel, a whole lot of others, I think, used to be regular visitors to IIM Calcutta. And people like Nitish De, Dharani Sinha, Atreya, and Suresh Srivastava, a whole lot of them used to work there. I think these were the people who were instrumental in initiating organization development exercises in a large number of public sector in the eastern part of the country. In the west, I think the IIM Ahmedabad was impacted by socio-technical systems approach. I think Dr. Sarabhai used to invite people like A.K. Rice and so on. So they worked, and then people like Dr. Kamala Chaudhary and others went to University of Michigan, influenced by the University of Michigan survey research and feedback studies. I think they also impacted quite a number of organizations. In addition, people like Dr. K.K. Anand, Tarun Sheth, who worked at IIM Ahmedabad, also were trained at NTL. And with IIM Ahmedabad the faculty and Calcutta faculty and SIT Institute faculty, and later, of course, joined by Francis Meneges of TMTC, I think these formed a good network of people who had a thrill in terms of starting a body which is parallel to the Indian, parallel to the National Training Laboratories. And that is the beginning of, I think, the thoughts about the Indian Society for Applied Behavioral Sciences. Now, coming to the sectors, I think some of the sectors where I think Indian behavioral sciences made impact, certainly as I mentioned, is the Indian corporate sector. Bharat Heavy Electricals, I think, used both MBO approach as well as an OD approach, where people like Dr. Awad Ahmad worked with them, Uday Parikh worked with them, used communications and a whole lot of other kind of interventions to bring continuous improvements in BHEL. And in 80s, of course, oil sector got into picture. Indian Oil, HPCL, BPCL, and later I think ONGC and a whole lot of corporations in oil sector also started adopting uh, the human process laboratories, or started making use of these people either in terms of survey research methods or re-looking at some of the HR systems and things of that kind. So behavioral scientists in particular have made quite a bit of impact in the Indian public sector. In the private sector, Larsen and Toubro led the I must say, quite a bit of innovations. Larsen and Toubro being an engineering organization and a professionally managed company, and had people like K.K. Anand and Dennis and Pereira, they brought in quite a bit of grid-based kind of approaches. Grid-based approach was also tried out much later by Dr. P.N. Singh with Aditya Birla Group. I think he must have conducted hundreds and hundreds of grid-based kind of seminars. Whereas in the south, if you look at, I think, Murugappa Group or TVS Group and so on, I think they were using their own methods, particularly using climate surveys, and also using in a limited way some kind of a training. Later, I think they got into, I think, the NTL based kind of a training and so on. DCM in Delhi again had people who were trained in the group process methods and made a phenomenal impact in terms of initiating a whole lot of other kind of things. So if you look at, I think the uh, Indian corporate sector, behavioral scientists have made quite a bit of an impact both in the private sector, public sector, and in multinational corporations like HLL and Imperial Chemicals, ICI, and so on, by people like Uday Parikh, Srivastava, and a whole lot of others working on either motivation training or training in the typical T group kind of a sense and so on. Simultaneously, I must also mention that the impact of behavioral scientists is not limited to only corporate sector. They've gotten into health. In health sector, uh, the the earliest of the OD interventions I remember was done by Abad Ahmad, Somnath Chattopadhyay, Manohar Nadkarni, and Uday Parikh at the Holy Family Hospital in late 60s and early 70s. uh, the work redesign happened, a role redesign happened, and I'm sure I think a whole lot of other kind of training programs took place in terms of organization development. Subsequently, Uday happened to work with the medical mission group of sisters. Somnath also happened to work, and it spread to other parts of the world where I think Uday and others used to go quite frequently to Rome and work with the MMS sisters. I myself got involved with another group from Rome, ICM, Immaculate Heart of Mary Sisters, and we also helped them in preparing for their international conferences, preparing for the younger sisters to be socialized into uh, the new order which they are trying to bring in, bringing about values and other kind of change and so on. So, if you look at therefore ISAPs or behavioral scientists worked with spiritual organizations, with worked with not-for-profit organizations, worked with the corporate sector, and also worked significantly with the government agencies. When I talk of government agencies, ISAPS was at some point of time directly involved in training the a group of trainers. I think ISAPS offered train the trainer series of programs in which Dr. Prayag Mehta, Nitish Dey, Manohar Nadkarni, Uday Parikh, and a whole lot of other people participated. And using, of course, training for development as a major kind of a handbook and so on. I think they have impacted the training field in a phenomenal way, working with the government sector and so on. So you practically name the sector. I think the behavioral scientists made an impact. I must mention here a significant impact made by Ishwar Dayal and team on reorganization of the State Bank of India and subsequently the LIC. I think these were two major projects. Even today, most of the senior people who work with these corporations remember. And they say the first reorganization done of State Bank of India is unparalleled, and quite often use it to compare the reorganization done in 1990s by McKinsey, and would say that the one done by Ishwar and S.K. Bhattacharya and others was the most classic. Of course, Bhattacharya, Ishwar Dayal, and all of them also did reorganization with many of the private sector companies and so on. Well, friends, I think these are just some random thoughts about how the Indian behavioral scientists have made an impact on government, not-for-profit organizations. Uh, I think Pradhan, the work the uh, by Ralph Linton, Uday Parikh, and a whole lot of others with Pradhan is a classic kind of an example of how much behavioral science has impacted. Paul Siromani continued with not-for-profit organizations. I think he's one of the senior most OB behavioral science professionals and also founders of the Indian Society for Applied Behavioral Science. In a silent way, Paul continued to work with not-for-profit organizations and so on. So if you see, you name the organization, you will find some impact or the other of behavioral scientists in the last 50 years. Coming back to the new economy industry, I think the impact of behavioral scientists in the last 15 to 20 years took a totally different kind of turn. Now, this is something which I will talk